You are seated in a conference room, and everything seems to be going smoothly. You have just shared a concept, explained your reasoning, or stood by a choice when a colleague shifts back in their chair, smirks slightly, and utters a single comment. The wording seems standard, businesslike, and perhaps even encouraging. But a wave of anxiety hits you. The underlying reason escapes you at that moment, but you register a definitive shift in the environment. This situation represents an encounter with subtle professional manipulation, and identifying these behaviors protects you from being caught off guard in the future. It is essential to recognize that individuals who undermine you in a corporate setting rarely do so aggressively. They do not shout, voice direct insults, or openly declare their intention to compete for your position. Such overt actions would allow you to anticipate the threat and prepare a defense. Instead, their leverage is communication through precise, practiced, and outwardly courteous expressions. These statements are crafted to mimic cooperative behavior, while systematically steering you into an inescapable disadvantage. Particular expressions can shift accountability to you for choices made by others. Certain comments lay the groundwork for a termination half a year down the line. Other remarks dismantle your concepts in front of executives without anyone explicitly voicing opposition. Remarkably, you have likely encountered the majority of these statements previously, without recognizing their true intent. This guide examines 7 specific expressions, breaking down the precise terminology, the underlying motive, and the immediate action required upon hearing them. This knowledge transforms your perspective during future corporate discussions, and bookmarking this information provides a valuable resource for future review. Imagine being in a briefing where you just presented an initiative that required 2 weeks of preparation. The attendees are engaged, and your supervisor appears intrigued. Suddenly, before anyone else can comment, a colleague across from you leans back, crosses their arms, and declares that they want to look at things from a contrary perspective for a moment, before proceeding to dismantle your proposal. You have undoubtedly encountered this approach previously, and viewed it as a benign or even constructive method for evaluating the strength of your concepts. That is the intended impression. In reality, the individual is expressing disagreement while using that specific phrasing as a barrier to avoid taking ownership of their opposition. Should your initiative prove successful later on, they never technically opposed it. They were merely exploring possibilities. Conversely, if leadership raises objections the following week, the room remembers that a warning was voiced. That scenario leaves you defending your concept, rather than the colleague defending their critique. You exit the discussion believing you stood your ground, while they depart having introduced skepticism without carrying any accountability for doing so. Pay attention to when this occurs, as this tactic is rarely employed during low-stakes scenarios. It surfaces precisely when your concept begins to gain approval from key decision-makers. When encountered, avoid adopting a defensive posture, as doing so pulls you directly into their trap. Instead, pivot the focus by asking for the specific elements that cause them concern. This approach forces them to commit to a concrete stance, neutralizing the ambiguity they intended to use. In most instances, the interrogation ceases, allowing your concept to proceed. The subsequent tactic appears frequently in digital correspondence, though it occurs in live discussions as well. You distribute a message outlining a choice, a schedule, or a nuanced perspective. The response arrives asking for confirmation that you mean a specific thing, or in a live setting, requesting verification that a certain point reflects your position, followed by a summary of your statement. However, the summary alters your original point, presenting a starker, more rigid, and exaggerated version of your words. By stripping away the context and qualifying details, they demand that you validate this skewed interpretation. This technique is highly precarious because it mimics innocent behavior. Requesting clarity generally signals cooperative intent, but the actual objective is to trap you into a written or witnessed commitment to a stance you never held, creating leverage for future use. For instance, If you note that a project might extend into the following quarter due to specific external dependencies, they might reframe it as a statement that the deadline will be missed. Once a supervisor sees that interpretation in an email chain, you become the person who forecast a shortfall, rather than the person who identified a risk when those dependencies eventually stall weeks later. Upon encountering this, pace yourself and refuse to validate their interpretation. Correct the narrative by repeating your original point precisely as first stated. In an email, you can clarify the record by explicitly quoting your original words to ensure mutual understanding. You are under no obligation to oversimplify your perspective for the convenience of others. The third expression typically bypasses formal discussions, occurring instead via private digital messaging in the corridor or by the break area when someone requests a brief private conversation. Lowering their tone and adopting a sympathetic demeanor, they claim they only want to offer assistance before delivering a critique, a warning, or a report about hallway gossip regarding your performance. Perhaps even suggesting you seek an alternative position based on rumors they claim to have heard. This approach mimics a supportive ally sharing insider details, and occasionally, that may be the case. However, it is vital to evaluate whether the interaction increased your self-assurance or left you feeling diminished. True support reinforces your position, provides data, and leaves the final decision to you. Conversely, undermining tactics achieve the opposite by generating self-doubt and anxiety regarding internal gossip. This state of mind leads to defensiveness and hesitation in subsequent discussions, creating the exact conditions for mistakes that validate their goals. The motivation behind this can stem from a desire for your role, an effort to gather information to pass up the chain of command, or an attempt to prevent you from overshadowing them. When faced with this, maintain a polite demeanor. Express appreciation for the input, but offer no confirmation, admissions of frustration, or personal doubts. Any admissions made in informal settings can be shared with others. Observing your professional standing over the subsequent 2 weeks will clarify the underlying intent through the resulting patterns. Consider a separate scenario where you are in a briefing and raise an unresolved point, question an item, or return to an open matter. Before the group can engage, a colleague looks slightly puzzled and questions why the topic is being raised again, implying it was settled previously. Consequently, the attention of the room shifts directly to you. In this moment, the issue is not a lack of preparation or awareness on your part. The prior discussion they are citing either never occurred, concluded without a resolution, or took place in a setting from which you were excluded. Regardless, a revisionist narrative has been introduced, framing you as the individual who is failing to stay updated. This behavior constitutes professional gaslighting, a psychological manipulation technique that turns your own recollection against you. Within a corporate environment, it represents a primary factor in creating a stressful workplace. This corporate version succeeds because other attendees rarely recall the exact specifics of prior sessions. They merely hold a vague recollection of the subject. Wanting to appear informed, they concur with the individual projecting certainty, who is intentionally positioning themselves against you. Continuous exposure to this pattern alters your professional reputation, casting you as someone who overlooks choices, revisits finalized matters, and impedes progress. Though entirely inaccurate, the perception remains. The counter strategy requires avoiding apologies or suggesting you overlooked an item, as such responses serve as confirmation of their claim. Instead, maintain complete composure and request a reminder of the specific conclusion reached to align your records, or ask where that decision is documented in the official files. This forces them to validate a claim with non-existent proof, leading them to retreat, obscure the point, or redirect the conversation, which alerts the room to the reality of the situation. The fifth strategy serves as a highly sophisticated method for disrupting professional progress. During a session with executives present, you voice a perspective, challenge an assumption, or pose a question that introduces a degree of awkwardness someone wished to avoid. Just as your point begins to resonate with the key stakeholders, an individual suggests moving the topic outside the current meeting or returning to it at a later time. The suggestion appears practical, orderly, and respectful of your input, prompting agreement on your part. The agenda progresses, and you depart assuming the matter will be addressed subsequently, though it rarely is. In this instance, an active point of discussion in front of primary decision-makers has been quietly isolated into a private space devoid of an audience, leadership, or documentation. Furthermore, that follow-up interaction seldom materializes, as it faces constant rescheduling or neglect. The longer the matter remains unresolved in private limbo, the more its relevance fades. While the gesture appears cooperative and considerate of time constraints, the true intent is to remove a compelling concept from a high-visibility setting, so it can fade away quietly. You can employ two defensive approaches here. The first involves securing a definitive follow-up slot immediately in front of the group, as a public scheduling commitment is difficult to evade. The second, more impactful approach involves documenting your perspective in the subsequent meeting summary. Distribute the summary yourself rather than waiting for others, clearly detailing the point raised, the unresolved query, and the agreement to defer the discussion. This preserves your position in the official record, even if the private discussion never occurs, providing the necessary documentation recommended by workplace specialists when navigating patterns of marginalization. In the sixth scenario, an issue has occurred involving a missed milestone, an ineffective choice, or a derailed initiative. During the diagnostic discussion, a colleague speaks up, prefixing their statement with a claim that they do not wish to assign blame before proceeding to do exactly that to you. Whether you are present or absent, the phrasing functions to absolve them. By claiming a reluctance to fault anyone, they proceed to connect a failure to your name while attempting to maintain an appearance of fairness. This represents a highly calculated tactic, as any immediate pushback faces a defense rooted in their initial claim of innocence. The approach leverages the social awkwardness of calling out an action that the individual explicitly denied doing. Crucially, this deflection typically originates from the party responsible for the error, or someone seeking to redirect scrutiny. Tracking where the focus shifts following the comment reveals the underlying motive. If you are the target of this comment, avoid reacting defensively in front of the group. Maintain an even tone and ask for a precise description of what they believe occurred, forcing a commitment to verifiable details. If you discover after the fact that this occurred in your absence, address the matter directly with your supervisor via written documentation detailing the actual data. This tactic relies on a lack of resistance. Once challenged on the record, the vulnerability shifts entirely to the individual who made the assertion. The seventh tactic represents the highest level of risk. You are participating in a standard email exchange with a colleague regarding a minor difference of opinion or a point requiring clarification over several messages. The subsequent reply arrives with an unexpected addition to the copy line. Either your supervisor, their supervisor, or a higher-level executive. The body of the message begins with a polite note, claiming the addition is merely for situational awareness. For those who have not experienced this, the dynamic shifts instantly, without any overt accusation or formal complaint. A name was simply appended to the communication, yet both parties understand the true intent. This is an escalated conflict disguised as a routine update, serving to establish a formal record. They are not merely updating leadership. They are creating a paper trail that involves you. From this point forward, every response is monitored by individuals who influence your professional evaluations, transforming every word into a witnessed statement and every disagreement into a public stance. The colleague achieves this without making a single negative comment, which is the precise goal. This tactic is uniquely damaging because it shapes the entire future trajectory of the interaction, rather than inflicting a single moment of reputational harm. effectively enclosing the conversation in high visibility constraints. When targeted by this action, execute 3 immediate steps. First, refrain from a defensive or emotional reply, as a reactive response confirms the trap of the copied message. Second, establish control over the narrative by replying with a composed summary of the situation to define the context before they can reframe it. Third, append a relevant supervisor or stakeholder of your own to the chain. The distribution list functions like a strategic layout. When a piece is moved against you, you respond with a balancing move, rather than remaining passive. The common thread across these 7 scenarios reveals that professional subversion relies primarily on calculated language rather than overt actions. The subtlety of the phrasing is precisely why the behavior succeeds, contributing to statistics showing that over half of professionals facing psychological manipulation in corporate environments choose not to report it due to a perceived lack of concrete proof. The actions do not outwardly appear problematic by design, protecting the perpetrator's record rather than yours. However, possessing an understanding of the actual intent behind these phrases, the mechanics of the manipulation, and the precise countermoves changes the dynamic entirely. The next time a colleague attempts to frame an opposition as a contrary perspective, or alters a distribution list for situational awareness, the underlying mechanics will be completely transparent, allowing you to respond with absolute precision and confidence.